right. Well, welcome. It's a beautiful spring day. Man, where do the days go? The sun is out. I am so glad it is time to plant the garden. I'm Tess Hoke. I'm a garden educator and real food mentor, and I call what I do yard food. I grow food in my yard, and I'm taking you along with me so that you can see what I'm up to and do the same thing too. Today, our yard food session is all about root crops and peas. It's the time of year when it's time to get going on those. We're going to cover what we need to know about them and how to give our little seedlings and seeds what they need in order to thrive and reach the harvest season with us and a bountiful basket of goods. So that's what I'm going to cover with you here today. We're going to get to that in just a second. But a couple little rules of the road as we always like to cover. Thanks so much for being here today. You've been muted as you've come into the classroom just so that we can have a really great uninterrupted presentation. The best part about that is there's a Q&A at the end. So we're going to open it up, give you a chance to ask your questions, make your comments, add to the conversation, and hopefully walk away with everything you need to know today about growing root crops and peas. My big goal here today, the big one, is to empower you with information so you can grow your food. Whether you want to save money at the grocery store, whether you want to have access to fresh, rich, clean food, or whether you want to have a skill set in your back pocket that allows you to grow food in your own yard, whatever your reasons, take this information today. Learn it, share it with everyone you love. And if you find it adds value to your life, consider donating for the class today. It's how I'm making my way and allows me to continue doing what I do for you. So I think we've dusted the floors here. Let's get down to the reason we're here, and that's because it's roots and pea shoots time of year. What do I mean by that? And what the heck do root crops and peas have in common? Well, that is one simple little answer. This is the time of year when it's important to get our act together and plant these particular crops. So let's split this into a couple little sections here today. Let's focus on root crops and then let's move to peas. Root crops, what does that mean? What is a root crop? Well, it's a good thing that the answer is simple for me. A root crop is literally a crop that grows, a veggie that grows, and its root is what becomes the vegetable that we're going to harvest later on. Root crops today are things like carrots, beets, parsnips, and my new favorite, believe it or not, turnips. This is the time of year when we've got to hustle and get our act together so that we don't miss out on the window of opportunity that our root crops want to take advantage of. So remember, we're here looking at this whole thing from the perspective of what it is that our root crops want from us and how we, as a gardener, can give it to them. So I'm going to start here today with my favorite root crop, carrots. Now, it's important to know that root crops never made it to the top 10 easiest veggies to grow in your garden. And that's what I want to help us with here today is what those things are that make them a little tricky to grow and how we can just creatively answer what it is that those crops need from us so that we don't make any mistakes, so that we end up at the end of harvest season with a bountiful harvest of root crops. The most important thing, and we'll just start at the beginning, and I'll confess I started a couple days ago without you. But what I did is I came out to my garden to this raised bed where I'm going to plant root crops, and I just took an assessment. I looked at my soil. Now, I don't need to be a biologist or a botanist or anybody other than who I am. I just looked at my soil and I just sort of stuck my hand in there. Was that soil rich? Was it loamy? Was it loose? Could I gently stick my fingers down inside of there? And that's an important question to ask yourself when you're planting root crops. Why? Because let's think about our little carrots, for example. They're going to grow their little root down into the ground, and that root is going to make the crop that we're going to harvest. Here's a little tip. Pretty carrots come from pretty soil. What do I mean by that? I mean that our carrots and our other root crops require this. They require us to loosen the soil so that those seeds and those roots can easily work their way down without any disruptions, without running into big stones or hunks of uncomposted debris. Anything our little root crop is going to run into is going to give it a little oopsie-doo and maybe make that beautiful carrot kind of upsy and wonky. We don't want it. We want to make sure that the soil we start with has been loosened with our shovel or however you like to approach your garden. I came out here with my shovel and I got into my raised bed and I just gently loosened it up, sort of fluffed it up. And then I took out any weeds that I found, any stones or hunks of wood or any big uncomposted debris, and I just put those aside because my goal was to loosen that soil. I then added some really rich compost, and that's also a key. Root crops are going to want rich, fertile soil from us. So we're going to have to make sure that we do some compost, some fertilizer into that soil. I worked it in. I just gently tossed it over. You know, I like to bake in the wintertime. And one of the things that I thought about when I was turning my compost into the soil is it's sort of the same technique when you make muffin batter or something. You don't want to just, stir it so hard that batter turns rubbery. You want to just fluff it and turn it gently over. And that's what I've done with my soil here. Just gently turned it over. I was very pleasantly surprised, and you may be too, to notice the worm population that was in my soil. Keep an eye peeled for worms in your garden. They are a sign to you that you are doing a good job, that you're on the right track, and that you're putting the right kind of stuff in your soil, because worms are a sign. Happy soil. Remember, pretty soil makes pretty carrots. So I fluffed it up. I turned gently over into it some compost, and now it is ready to go. But there's one more additive that I think I want to add, and I want you to be able to add it too, because it's so easy to access out there in the world. And that is coffee grounds. Now, I'm a big time coffee drinker. I love my coffee in the morning. And so I always have a stash of fresh used coffee grounds. And one of the things that root crops really benefit from are coffee grounds. So how can you get some? If you're a coffee drinker, save them in a pail on the side of the sink. Save them. Put them in your garden. If you aren't a coffee drinker, we've got so many wonderful, talented coffee shops around who are very happy, usually, to share with you coffee grounds. They need to do something with them, and they're happy to share them with home gardeners. So ask your favorite coffee shop if they have coffee grounds that they're willing to share with you. My guess is you're going to find plenty. So look at me. I'm just gently going to mush this into the soil. Not too hard, not too soft. Just gently toss it over. And then I'm just going to smooth this soil down. Now, the thing about root crops, the thing about carrots specifically, is on the back of the seed packet, I always like to remind us that the instructions that we need to plant successfully is right here. But what I want to share with you today for your success is some little tips that you can apply to this information on the back of your seed packet so that you experience success beyond your wildest dreams. And I know this works because I, over my gardening career, have struggled with root crops, have really struggled particularly with carrots. I would find my carrots didn't germinate so well, or that they were my rows were never straight, or that they dried out before they germinated. And that's what I want to share with you. The back of the seed packet on my carrot pack, and yours is going to say the same thing too, tells me that these seeds need to be planted 1/4 of an inch deep. Now, that's not very deep, right? So let's just take an idea here. Just envision this in your head with me for a second. We've prepped our row. We've done all these beautiful things for the soil, knowing that when we take care of the soil and we feed the soil can feed us. But we go to plant our carrots. We plant them 1/4 inch deep. We cover them over and we water them and we go on with our life, right? You're a busy peep. You've got things that you've got to accomplish every single day. Time gets away from us. The sun gets hot. And we go out to our garden and that 1/4 inch of soil, which is not very much, right? That is on top of our seeded carrots has dried out. And what that means is our carrot seeds underneath that has also dried out. And what happens when germinating seeds dry out and they don't stay moist all the way through that germinating process? This is what happens. They die. We lose our effort. We don't want to do that. So I'm going to share with you a creative way that I have found to make sure that my carrot bed never does that. I've also learned on the back of the seed packet, mine particularly says these carrots can take anywhere from 14 to 21 days to germinate. So that's, a long time to keep that top little 1/4 inch moist. So here's what I'm going to do. And if you find this useful, I would highly recommend you apply this in your carrot patch too. It works for every root crop, by the way. Carrots we're just using for an example. So I prepped my soil. We've added some beautiful compost and we added some coffee grounds because we know root crops love coffee grounds. They love that extra organic material and they also love that extra nitrogen that coffee grounds tend to hold in them. But I'm going to water this before I seed it. And you'll see as I go along why this is such an incredible way to make sure that your carrots come out great. Okay, I'm going to water that bed. And I'm going to decide which way my crops are going to go. Now, when you go out to your garden beds and you think about where you want to grow your crops, think about your carrots are going to want full sunshine. So look around, make the best decision you can so that you provide your carrots sunshine throughout most or not all of the day. So that's what I've got going here. And maybe you'll find the same in your space. I've got full sun for my carrots to grow. Prep the soil. Now I've watered the soil in. If you open your seed packets of carrots, one of the things you're going to find, and this is kind of what makes carrots kind of difficult sometimes, is that they're itsy bitsy teeny weeny seeds. They're not very big, which means that they're easy to overseed and they're easy to kind of lose your way with. So I'm going to put just a few of them in my hand. Well, it's a few. And I'm going to set these aside and I'm going to decide which way I want to row my row. Now, depending on your space, you get to decide. And some crops, it's really critical to decide which direction you want to place those as far as them growing up and shading. But carrots, not so important. The peas we're going to get to. So I've decided that I'm going to run a row going this way. Now, in the old days, this is what I used to do. I used to take a tool, my favorite garden tool, and make a trench and plant in here all of my carrot seeds. I would plant them a little thick, thinking, well, if some of them didn't come up, not a problem. The packet will encourage me to plant them a 1/2 inch apart. But I'm thinking about how big the carrot is going to grow. Now, often we don't have the seed packet in our back pocket. It's a really useful tool if you do, but let's say you don't have the seed packet and you wonder, how deep should I plant my seeds and how far apart should I plant them? I want to share with you a rule of thumb that you can just stick in your gardening tool belt and use for any crop, any seed, anywhere along the line. And here it is. You can look at a seed, and these are carrot seeds, so they're very itsy bitsy tiny. I can't even show them to you because they're that little. But you can look at a carrot seed in your palm, and you can always discover how deep to plant a seed by looking at its widest portion and planting it twice that deep. So if I look at my little carrot seeds and I think about twice as deep as they are wide in their widest spot, that maybe takes me to a 1/4 inch or even less than that. But here's the tip that I've learned over the years. It really boosted my success and I want you to apply this too. Okay, you ready? Instead of digging a trench to plant my seeds, I've watered my soil and I'm going to plant my seed directly on top of the soil. We're going to do some other things in a minute to make sure that this works, but here's how we start. So I'm going to take my tiny little carrot seed and I'm going to just gently, sort of with the edge of my hand, just sort of touch the soil and kind of get a general idea of where my line is going to be. Because it's super easy to wonky your rows up. I'm going to put my little carrot seed in its spot, and I'm just gently going to press it in. I'm going to put my carrot seed in its spot, and I'm gently going to press it in. I'm going to pick another one from my hand, and maybe a half of an inch away, I'm going to do that again. And I'm going to continue dropping my seed and gently pressing it into this moistened soil. The soil is moist, remember. I don't want to plant in dry soil. I want to make sure that it's plenty moist. I'm just dropping a carrot seed, and I'm going to press it in. And I'm going to go all the way down my row. Now, there are other ways you can accomplish this task. In garden catalogs, there are seed planters. They're these little pencil-shaped units that you put your seeds in, and you just sort of push the top, and one by one, it allows seeds to come out the end. Those are great if you happen to have one in your drawer, your back pocket. I didn't have one of those today, and so I'm just going to use what nature gave me. She gave me my fingers. And so I'm going to drop a seed half an inch apart, and I'm just gently going to press those into the soil. Remember, I've moistened the soil, so now that's moist. I'm going to continue to make row after row of carrots. Carrots are a great crop if you are serious about growing your food and you're serious about having a harvest later on in the season to eat through all winter long. Carrots are an amazing storage crop. So I like to grow a lot of carrots in my summer gardens so that I can eat some fresh later on, but also so that I can store a big harvest in my root cellar or my refrigerator for eating, fresh eating all through the winter, for all those soups and stews, for all those juices that we love to make. Carrots are a great way to boost your food supply in a very small amount of space. You know, when you think about it, the size of a beach towel, you know, big enough for us to lay on at the beach, is plenty of space to grow all of the carrots that you're going to need for really most of your season, for most of your eating season. This is how we're going to start it. We put the soil, we prep the soil, one by one, we planted these seeds, gently put them on the soil, press them in, and now here is where the rubber hits the road. Remember, the seed packet is going to suggest that I cover them with 1/4 inch of soil, and that I do my best to keep that 1/4 inch soil moist until they sprout in 2 to 3 weeks. That's a long time. And I know that's pretty much in my life, maybe in yours too, an impossibility. So let's make this work for us, should we? I've got with me one of my favorite tools from those same coffee shops that will give you coffee grounds. I've got a burlap bag. And here's why this little tool comes in so handy when I'm planting my carrots. I've got this moistened row, right? It's moist. I'm going to take my bag. Now, if I had a big long row, and I'm going to finish after you and I get done here today, but I don't want to bore you with just all of this planting, but I'm going to finish and I'm going to have a lot of rows to cover with a burlap bag. But for you and me, we're going to take this burlap bag and we're going to put it right over our seed bed, right over where you and I planted those carrot seeds. And I'm going to water it in. And I'm going to make sure that this burlap bag doesn't dry out between now and the time that my carrots germinate. Now, one of the things about burlap is once burlap gets wet, and this is why I love this so much, and I'm hoping to really inspire you too. One of the things about burlap is once it gets wet, it takes a long time for the burlap to dry out. You can get a wet burlap bag and throw it over your fence, and it'll take many, many hours before it dries out. And that's our goal. We want the burlap to stay moist. Why? Because then our bed underneath is moist. And remember that 1/4 inch of soil that our seed packet encouraged us to cover those seeds with? Well, instead of using soil to do that, you and I used the burlap bag. It's shading that soil. It's creating a dark, moist environment for our carrot seeds to sprout, and it's keeping them moist throughout these warm spring days and the sun that comes down and bakes our soil dry. So now I've got a couple to 3 weeks before my root crops, before these carrots come up. The same is true with other root crops. And I want to plant some more of those with you in just a second. But the burlap bag is going to keep my little seeds underneath here nice and moist and dark. Now, the seed packet told me 2 to 3 weeks before germination. I got to make sure that I put this on my calendar or I put it up here, because what I don't want to do is have my carrots start to germinate without me remembering one very important part to this little trick. And that is, as soon as we see our carrots beginning to sprout, it's time to remove the burlap bag. It's done its job. Our carrots have sprouted and we're off to the races with great germination. The biggest trick for most home gardeners is germinating carrot seeds, okay? So we'll remove this once our carrots have germinated, and then we'll continue growing them along the lines and suggestions that our seed packet gives us. Now, here as we go along with carrots or beets or parsnips or turnips or radishes, here's also a super important part to getting beautiful root crops. And that is, as they sprout and as they begin to grow, we must make sure that we continually thin those rows. We don't want our carrots, for example, to have been planted too thickly and to grow way too comfortable with each other in our bed. We need to make sure that we leave room for each of these carrots underground to begin to grow wider without running into their neighbor carrot, okay? So as my little carrots begin to grow, and they may get up the top, the greens at the top may get up maybe 2 or 3 inches, I might go out to my bed at that point and then thin out any extra carrots that I accidentally planted. It's way easy to plant too many carrot seeds. So chances are you're going to need to do some thinning, but don't blow it off, because this is also one of the places that you've got to tend your carrot bed and your root crops in order to get big, beautiful return from your seed. So I'm going to go out a little bit later when those little carrots are up far enough where I think it's time to do a thinning, and I'm just going to thin them out. And I'm going to thin them out to at least 1/2 inch to 1 inch. Now, here's a good rule of thumb, another one that you can put in your back pocket so that you've got the answer to this question that'll come up a million times with a million different root crops. And that is, well, how far apart should I have these? How far apart should I grow my carrots or my beets or my radishes or my onions for that amount? Think about this. Imagine going to the grocery store and reaching into the veggie bins and pulling out a full-size carrot because you're going to take it home and chop it up for dinner. Look at that carrot. How big around is that carrot? That's the mental image you want to have in your head when you go to thin your root crops out, whatever they are. What is the size of that mature root crop that you are hoping to get? And envision that in your row right now. While they're teeny weeny babies, envision that. And then that gives you an idea of how far apart to begin to thin. We've got a big fat full-size carrot here. How much room is that guy going to take? And what's in the middle between him and the next big fat carrot that could grow next to him? If we've got lots of little carrots in the middle, let's take those out. Let's make sure that this carrot and this carrot have room to grow into big carrots without getting too tightly packed. Does that make sense? Envision a full-size root veggie in your row as you are doing your thinning, just to give you a general idea of how much room to leave in between what will become that full-size carrot. We want to make sure that as it grows down below the surface of the ground, it's got room to swell up without running into its neighbor. That's going to give you a big fat return on any root crops that you plant over and over and over. So those are some secrets for carrots. The biggest mistake any of us can make, and it's not so much a mistake, it's just that life gets busy and it's hard to tend to all of these tiny little details when the sun comes out and it gets hot. The burlap bag is going to save your tushy 1,000,000 times overall. The same is going to work for beets. I've got beets, I've got turnips, and I've got radishes. Now let's plant a little row of radishes right next to my carrots. I'm going to do the same thing I did. I'm going to leave room in between the beds. I'm going to do my best to imagine full-size carrots growing in that row. And I'm going to make sure that they're not going to grow too fat and too full to crowd my next guy. But here's the thing about radishes that I love so much. I have an ability to squeeze them a little closer into my row, therefore giving me more room in my space to grow even more radishes. Because why? Because radishes are quick and fast. They're not going to take all of the season to grow like my carrots are. I'm going to plant my radish seeds. I'm going to let them grow. And in 3 or 4 weeks, 5 weeks, maybe at the most, after they start to sprout, they're ready to come out of the soil and go into my kitchen. Now, I'm going to do the same. I'm going to put a seed on the ground and just press it in. Put a seed on the ground and press it in. The soil is moist, remember? And so that's what my seeds are going to need. Now, I have to admit, I never used to be a radish fan. I never used to be a turnip fan. But look at me. Here I am planting these little guys, not because I just found them on a seed rack, but because I've learned a really yummy way to use them in the kitchen. Maybe you know this, but let me share it with you anyway. I've really gotten into roasting my root veggies. It really adds a whole other level and depth of flavor to them and makes them more accessible to me, kids, guests, anybody that's coming to my dinner table. Roasted veggies are always a hit. So I'm going to take my radishes early when they're ready to pull out, when they've swelling up, when their little radishes are turning into the size of a radish that looks good to you. And I'm going to pull them up, take them into my kitchen, chop them up, toss them in a little olive oil and roast them nice and hot, take them out and serve them. They are incredibly delicious and add a whole different flavor and maybe a way to use these root crops for you in your kitchen. The same thing is true with turnips. I never grew up with turnips. I didn't know about them. I didn't really care about them. But one day I ate them roasted from a hot oven and they were delicious. And it dawned on me, I can do the same thing in my garden row too. If you're into trying some fun new things that maybe you haven't tried, give roasted root veggies a try. It'll change your tune for sure. But I've got those down. I've pressed those seeds in. And again, I'm going to use my little burlap bag as a cover. I'm going to make sure that I water that in so this burlap is nice and moist. And I guarantee you it's going to stay moist and it's going to keep that grow bed underneath nice and moist for later. But here's the deal. If you're planting a whole bunch of different kind of root crops in your row under the same piece of burlap, not all of these root crops are going to sprout and germinate at the same time. Radishes can be relatively quick, 5-7 days sometimes. Remember, those carrots are going to take much longer. Beets and turnips, somewhere in between. Your seed packet is going to give you the details. So you'll always want to make sure that you're always checking in that early stage of growth to make sure that your little seedlings are coming up. And if they are, that it's time to pull back that burlap at that moment from that root row so that that little crop can continue on its growth journey. Really important. I've found accidentally myself, sometimes my little roots have been sprouted for a day or two. I didn't know. They'll recover, but they can't grow under the burlap. You must tend to it and you must remove that once you see germination happen. So see if that little trick doesn't help you. It's really, really boosted my success in the root crop rows. So root crops, really, this is a good time to get them going. And why? Why now? Why is it early? Why do we want to plant root crops early? Well, many root crops really need to germinate while the weather is cool. They don't like germinating in the heat of the season. Radishes, one of the very first things I can grow outside in my garden, really don't do well and won't grow for me later on when the garden gets hot, when it's time to plant those hot crops like tomatoes and peppers. Turnips, the same thing. Now is the time to plant them if I want to get a good return on my efforts. Beets, the same thing. Now, beets are a little bit more flexible. I can plant some beets now and get an early beet harvest a little bit later in the season. And I can also plant some beets, maybe, about the time I put out my tomatoes and get a further harvest later on down the road for winter storage. So think about that, about using some of these crops to eat now and some of them to eat much later on in your winter months. Root crops, now is the time to do it. Which brings us to what it's also time to do, and that is it's time to plant your pea patch. Why? Again, peas need the cool of the season to germinate. They love cool temperatures and the soil to germinate. They won't germinate once it gets too hot. But most importantly, we want to start them early, like now. We're in mid-April here. The sun is just starting to warm my cheek. It's warming yours too. And we want to make sure that we get our peas planted so that they can germinate, that they can grow, that we can do the harvest and have it in our kitchen before those hot summer temperatures arrive. Because once that happens, our peas tend to begin to not do so well. They struggle in the heat, which means that their production is going to go downhill and it's going to be done. So make sure that you capitalize on the majority of the growing season, which is now, so that you can get a big return in the pea patch. All right, peas. There's a couple different types and there's some different kinds as well. Peas, here's where you want to make sure that when you go to purchase your pea seeds, that you read on the back of the packet or in the catalog and you discover what kind of peas you're getting. Some peas are vine peas. They'll grow 4, 5, 6 feet tall. Other peas are short. They'll grow maybe 1 or 2 feet tall. The peas that grow really tall are definitely going to need some sort of trellis that you need to put up for them to grow on. We'll talk about that in a second. And you can get super creative. There's no right or wrong way to do it, just something for our little peas to hold on to. But back to that, if you have chosen a variety that maybe grows 2 feet tall, there's some other tricks that you can do, and you may not need quite such a trellis. But now's the time to plant peas. Here's a question I get asked most often. Do I soak my pea seeds before I plant them? And do I have to use an inoculant to soak my peas in or put in my growing bed before I plant my pea seeds? Okay, let's tackle that 2 ways. 1, no, and 2, no. The answer is no. You don't have to. What do I mean? You don't need to soak your peas before you plant them. Now, some pea packets are going to suggest that you do soak them. I live in a northern climate. My soils are cool yet. They're not as warm. The soil temperatures are not as warm as my friends who garden further south in other growing climates. So I know my soil temperatures are cool. To me, and I've got experience over the years that have taught me that this is true, I can get away without soaking my pea seeds because the soil is cool and they're going to be just fine emerging on their own. If I soak them and the temperature gets super cold again and it stays rainy and cold, what I run the risk of with soaking my peas is that they'll rot in the soil. And I've just found better success for me in my cold zone area of just choosing not to soak my peas. But you try it. You soak some, you plant them dry, see what your best results are, and apply that to your gardening encyclopedia that you're comprising here with me today. So I'm going to choose, based on what I know for my own growing zone and my own growing bed, not to soak my peas. I'm also going to choose not to use an inoculant. What the heck is a pea inoculant? A legume inoculant. Peas are a legume. What that means is peas are really darn incredible biological creatures when you think about it. They have an ability. I mean, imagine if where you grew or where you worked, you could do the same thing. If nitrogen was your thing and it's what, floated your boat and made your world go around, as it is with peas, if you had the ability to pull the nitrogen out of the air and put it in the soil so that you had access to that as a growing pea, how amazing would that be? Well, that's what these little guys can do. They can pull the nitrogen out of the air and use it by fixing it on their root nodules in the soil to use for later growth. That's what a pea inoculant does. It is a soil bacterium that's in that inoculant that is a symbiotic relationship that the pea root has with that particular creature, that particular biological creature. And that is a relationship that they form so that the pea can bind that nitrogen to its root. That's what I love about the garden, is that there's always more going on than you and I might know about. That it's not just about us and what we want, what we are dictating above ground, that there's this whole web of life that exists within our soil. So when we learn about these things, it just really, for me, it just really, I don't know, it just opens things up to a big old wow factor for me. And I realize I'm not the only creature in the garden, right? I'm just one of those webs of life. And my pea seeds, my pea plants are yet another, as are all of those soil bacterium and worms and things that exist in the soil that I may never hear about or know about. That's cool. I'm just going to say thank you for being here. And I'm going to do my best to care for you in the best way I can. So I have found in my garden pea inoculant. Yes, it has an ability to help the pea pull in even more nitrogen. But if your soil is good, if you've tended it, if you've added organic material, especially a little nitrogen in the beginning, because this whole process of pulling this from the air and fixing it to the root nodes is going to take our pea plant a little while. So let's give it a little boost, a little help, a little respect by putting some nitrogen on our soil. Like I said, I prepped the soil before you and I got here today, and I added some really yummy compost. And I added also some coffee grounds to my soil just to add some extra vavoom by adding a little extra nitrogen and organic material. So I've done that. I feel really good about having cared for my soil first before I'm planting the seeds. So I'm going to choose, like I said, because of where I am in the cool soil area, I'm going to choose not to soak my peas. But I'm going to do my best to make sure that my pea bed never gets dry. Now, again, make sure that you do me a favor and check the back of your pea packet for how deep these peas are supposed to be planted and how wide apart they are. Again, here's that rule of thumb for you. You can always know how deep to plant your seeds without your seed packet by looking at your seed and planting it twice as deep as it is wide. So I'm looking at that, and that's going to make me think, okay, at least a half of an inch deep. So I've dug a simple little trench, and I'm going to place that pea seed in the ground. Now you can apply the same little trick you and I did with our root crops by just placing it on top of the soil and pressing it down to about a half an inch, which if you look at your finger, maybe that first little joint on the end is about a half of an inch for me, maybe the same for you. And that would be a good marker for you to press it down that far. I've dug a little trench and I'm going to plant my seeds. The pea packet suggests that I plant them an inch apart. But here's one thing I've learned over the years about seeds, about pea seeds. Peas love their friends. They love other peas. They love to have pea parties in the pea patch. And so I'm going to make sure that I put plenty of peas in the row so there is partying going on. So instead of putting them an inch apart, I'm going to put them a half of an inch apart in the bottom of my row. That's about a half of an inch deep. Every half an inch, I'm going to plant a pea. Some of these will germinate, some of them not. Now, these are nice pea seeds, so my guess is most of them are going to germinate. Let's say that you've got some pea seeds in your pantry or your drawer or under your bed or wherever you like to keep your seeds from maybe last year or a year ago or 2 years ago. Do me a favor, and before you plant those peas, maybe put them in a paper napkin next to your sink and keep that paper napkin moist. Don't ever let it dry out. The pea seeds that you place in between those wet pieces of paper towel will begin to swell. And in a few days, you will know if they are viable, if they have life left in them. They begin to send out a little root. You'll know that those pea seeds are still good, have viability in them, and you can plant them in your garden. So if you ever wonder about the viability of the seeds you still have left, that's a great little way to check them out. Put them inside of a piece of moist paper towel, Keep that moist paper towel next to your sink so it never dries out, and check them for a few days and see if they don't begin to sprout. If they don't, you'll know it's time to up and get a new packet of seeds. So I've got plenty of little seeds in there. I've planted them, golly, a half of an inch apart. And now I'm going to cover them with soil. Now remember, the packet suggests that it's a half of an inch. So I don't want to I don't want to plant them too deep. I don't want them to have to like drive to China and back before they reach the top of the soil. I want to make sure that they're not too deep. But I also want to make sure that my pea row stays dry. So we know about this burlap bag, right? You and I now have a little trick up our sleeve. I could sure do that, and I probably will. But I want to make sure that when I water my seeds in, they're nice and moist. I've done a good job. You're going to do the same about prepping that soil nice and loose and full of organic material. And then I'm going to wait for my peas to emerge. I love growing peas this time of year because they love the cool, and I don't have to worry about nighttime frost. Where I live, it can get really cold at night. It can freeze still in this early part of April. The peas don't care. They're going to do their thing with or without me, and they're going to sprout when they know it's time. So be patient. Just allow them to do their thing. They've got this down. They know what they're doing. Your job and my job is just to give them what they need at this stage, and that is moist soil. Not too moist, but moist enough, right? Like that wrung out sponge, so that they have everything they need to stay moist and sprout. Now, here's what might happen to you in your pea patch as you begin to see your peas come up. You and I, my friend, are not the only ones looking for lunch in the garden. There are creatures right and left that have been watching us plant these seeds and are waiting for their moment of opportunity to take advantage of that by snipping off the tops or eating them when our backs are turned. I live where I've got a lot of quail in my yard. I love quail, but they love my pea patch. And so what I want to make sure that I do is cover my growing, emerging peas in the early stage until they begin to get high enough to grow up my trellis, so that those birds and other things, mice or another, so that they don't get access to my emerging peas. I can't tell you how many times I've gone out excited to see my emerging peas to realize somebody beat me to the punch and I have to start all over. I don't want that to happen to you. So let's think about something, a DIY experience you and I can have together to make sure that our peas can emerge and begin growing without becoming lunch for something else. What do we have? Well, I know I'm always talking about my friend remake cloth, and this is a good use for that. It's lightweight. The light of the sun will come through it. You can water right on top of it. You can place it right over your grow row, weigh it down with stones or boards, and just make sure that nothing can get under it. This will definitely keep the quail off or the birds off or something like that. That might keep the kitties out too. There's something to think about. And allow your peas to come up. Now, we often have rodent issues, and I've had mice issues in my garden. I don't have a kitty cat right now. I need to get one. Maybe you've got one and it's doing its job. But a lot of times rodents, those mice, they come out a lot of times at night and they eat my pea patch before I know what's going on. So sometimes they can climb under, they can work their way under that remake cloth. So what else do I have around that'll help me protect my emerging peas and keep those rodents out? If you're a yogurt fan, or you've got some plastic containers or some plastic cups, you can cut out the bottom of those and literally just place them right over the growing, emerging pea row, one by one by one. What that's going to do is create a barrier between the rodent and your peas. Now, we don't have to grow our peas too long that way, just long enough for them to emerge and begin to grow up and not be such a feast for rodents. So if you find that rodent issues are something that you deal with or know or see signs of them, then think about how you can best protect your pea seedlings from not becoming lunch, because it is a disappointing experience and it happens way more often than you know. Now, your peas are going to continue to grow because we've dealt with the rodents and we've dealt with the birds and we've dealt with everybody else that's out there. So we're going to now need to make sure that our growing pea crop has something to fix itself on. Remember, I planted my peas a little bit thicker, which is going to do two things. It's going to give me extra peas, and it's going to make sure that as my growing peas grow, they've got a friend nice and close to them that they can cross-pollinate with and help to hold each other up. If you've got a pea variety that is a shorter variety, you can often get away without using a tall trellis of any sort. Peas have little arms and they like to hold on to each other. And if you plant your shorter growing variety of peas close together like that, as they grow and emerge, they'll begin to hold on to each other and use each other as support. So it's possible to grow without a trellis if that's the variety you're growing. Let's talk about some other pea tips here. There's some different kinds of peas, right? There are three types of peas. There's the shelling pea, where you grow the pea, it grows to a mature size, you pluck it from the vine and you shell out all those yummy round peas. There's a snap pea, where you grow the pea, and just before it reaches a full maturity, when it has swollen up and it looks nice and bright green, you pluck them off and you snap them in pieces and you eat both that pod and that growing pea inside. Those are my favorite. They're sweet and delicious and I love them. But one of my new favorites are snow peas, those Asian peas, those flat pod peas that you see in stir fries a lot of times. Those are really yummy and I'm beginning to be quite a fan of them. So that's what I have grown here today is an Oregon sugar pod pea. They're a snow pea. They're going to grow as a flat pod pea and I'm going to harvest them when that out pod is big enough for me to eat. There is really no right time. You can just choose them along their growing path, how big you want to have them. The smaller, the tender they are, the bigger they get, the more they need to be cooked or snapped or chewed. But I like to get mine sort of in a mid-range. Keep your eyes open and just experiment if you've never grown sugar pod peas. They're all delicious. Anything is yummy right off the vine, but you'll find that sweet spot for you about where you like to grow and harvest your sugar pod peas. So they're delicious. So that's kind of pea season. There is one more important thing that I want to share with you, both about pea pods and about root crops. One of the things about becoming a backyard gardener that I've really been exploring over the last years is the idea of saving my seed and really becoming sustainable in my own garden for not only producing my food, but also for producing the seeds that I need to grow my next garden. So if this sounds interesting to you, if you want to try it out, then when you're growing your peas specifically, let's remember this. And this happens more than I'd like to admit, but it happens. I'll be doing my thing and my life gets busy, yours gets busy too, and it's time to go plant or pick peas. Whoops, forgot them yesterday, got to do them today. Peas mature quickly, and what looked ripe yesterday may be overripe today. If that happens to you and like, shucks, I should have picked these, they're a little bit beyond ripe, and now I just need to pull them off the vine and feed them to my chickens or put them in my compost pile or whatever. How about this for an idea? If you have purchased an open pollinated variety of seed, and I highly recommend you do this, an open pollinated variety means that particular variety can be saved and grown year after year and give you that same pea that you planted originally. It's not a crossbreed, it's not been modified or changed. It will come true when you save those seeds. That's why open pollinated vegetable seeds are so critical and important for us, not only to purchase from retailers, but also to begin to save for ourselves. So those peas that got away from me on the vine that I should have picked a day or two earlier and now are just a little bit overripe, I take advantage of that and I leave them on the vine and I grow them for seed. I'll have plenty more peas coming up, but I want to make sure that I keep some on the vine that I let go all the way to maturity, which means they're going to be green and lush. They're going to turn semi-green, then they're going to turn brown. And once they're done, I'll pull those off. Once they've turned totally brown and dry, that's the time I'll harvest those peas. I'll pull them off, I'll put them in a brown paper bag, and I'll set that bag aside and let them continue to dry. Somewhere later in the fall, I might shuck all those out and store them away for next spring's planting. But if you're a seed saver, do me a favor, because I've done this before and it's been super disappointing. When I harvest those dried peas, what appears to be dry, off of my vines, and I put them in a bag for later, make sure you don't store them in plastic, because there's always moisture left in them and they will mold. We want to make sure that their drying process continues until they're completely dry. So paper is always a good choice. All those paper bags we end up with under our sink or our counter, this is where those come in handy, using them to put all these seed pods in for later. Set them aside, let them dry out. Later on, you and I can have a seed saving class. We can talk about how to best save them for later, how to best store them, what to do with them. If you were with me earlier in the season, you still have access it. I can send a link to you. We did a microgreens class. I can save these pea seeds from my overripe peas on my vine. I can let some of them intentionally go to seed. I can harvest them, save them, and I can grow those out as microgreens in the dead of winter. So there you go, win-win. Not only am I getting peas for the plants in my garden, fresh eating, not only am I getting an abundant harvest to store some in my freezer, let's say, for winter eating, but I also have an opportunity to grow my microgreen seeds for winter sprouting. I love that idea. And I'm really starting to utilize the more than one crop that a plant can give you in the garden. Think about how you can utilize that plant, not only for fresh eating, not only for storage, but also for seed production for the next crops that you'd like to grow. Back to root crops and saving those seeds. It's important to know with your root crops, one important thing. There are some root crops that are annuals, meaning that they will provide you seeds that very year. Radishes are an example. If you don't harvest all your radishes and they get too big and you think I'll just leave them for now, they will sprout a flower on the top that very year and they will produce your radish seeds. If you plant your carrots and you harvest all of your carrots, you won't have an opportunity to save carrot seeds that year. Why? Because carrots are a biennial. They grow their root the first year, and the second year, if you leave one or two in your garden row, they will send up a seed stalk and produce you seeds that second year. So one of the things I really love to share with my students, and I like to remember for myself, is when it's fall and I'm harvesting my beets and my carrots and my parsnips, I like to make sure that I leave a few in the row for next year's seed production, so that I can gather seeds for an ongoing harvest of root crops in my rows. Really important to think about. If you're not sure if that root crop is a annual or a biannual, just do it a little Google search. But now you understand, not everything produces seeds its first year. Some crops take 2 years to get to that seed production stage. So think about that. Saving your seeds is super valuable. And really, it gives us an opportunity as a human species, as we change, as so much of what's once existed as far as seed supplies begin to disappear for other reasons, that we have access to seeds whenever we need them when the planting is right. Plus, you'll be able to save seeds and share them with everybody you love. I love win-win in the garden, and there's another reason to save your seeds. Okay, my friends, that's it. Those are some really important details to get you off to a rocking start to success in the garden when it comes to root crops and peas. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If you have any other questions about other crops that are going on in your garden, what might be coming at you, maybe some issues that you've had in the past, go ahead and bring them up. One of the ways that we're going to do this now is to allow you to raise your hand icon somewhere there in your field. You're savvy. raise your hand icon or type in the chat that you have a question, and Darlene, our moderator, will be happy to do that for you. She'll release your microphone, give you the floor, and we can hear your beautiful voice, see your beautiful face, and answer any question that you might have. So while you're doing that, while we're thinking about what those are, I'm just going to make another row, and I'm going to plant myself some more carrots. And I'm going to do that. Remember, I've got a row of radishes growing in between my carrots, but I'm not too concerned because my carrots are going to come up and my radishes are going to be harvested before crowding is an issue. So I'm just making a little mark in my bed where my carrots are going to go. And I'm going to do the same thing we did earlier, and I'm going to plant some carrot seeds. I'm going to just gently put them on the soil. I'm going to press them in, and I'm going to get them off to a start. The soil is nice and perfectly moist. I'm just going to place and press.
Hi, Tess. This is Julie.
Julie.
I have a few questions.
Yeah.
First, the burlap bag, doesn't matter how thick. I noticed you had it folded quite a bit. Does it matter how thick it is?
No, it doesn't. I just folded it up because I did. But
Okay.
no, it doesn't. What you want to make sure of is that it stays moist. And so if you don't need the whole thing for your bed, folding it, I've learned, keeps the moisture in it even more. But burlap is just so good in the garden. Who cares if it gets wet? You can get them free at your coffee shop, and they just never dry out, which is really a help when it comes to these warm, sunny days in the root crop row. So yeah, that doesn't matter.
Okay.
And what else might I?
Sunshine for the peas and the root vegetables. We don't have full day sun, as you can tell. We live with all these pine trees. And I don't know how many hours is considered full day sun, or should we not bother with them if we don't have enough sun?
Well, okay, let's think about that. That's a really good question, and you probably represent a lot of people's spaces, right? Nothing is ever perfect. So taking a look at your garden rows, it's early and maybe there's not a lot of leaves on trees, so which might give you a little extra sun. But if that's not the case, where in your garden rows do you get the maximum amount of sun? Now, your peas are pretty flexible. The reason peas grow so well in the early of the season is because it's not hot. And so if you've got a semi-shaded garden, you might have a much longer pea season than I do, which is like, wow, I want to come to your garden and plant my peas. So I wouldn't be so worried about my peas in a semi-shady garden. That might play to your benefit a little bit later on. So let's call this experimenting and plant them at the best of your choice, the best of your ability, and see how well you do. So the peas can take a little bit of shade and probably will appreciate it as the days get warmer and the days get hotter and that sun gets a little bit more intense. So you might be cool there with peas. Pick the most sunny spot you've got for your roots, okay? And then just try it. One of the things that I really encourage you to do, I encourage myself and all of the people that I share this with, is that you just try. You know what the carrots are going to ask for. You know what your root crops want. How can you give it the best you've got? What is the most sunshine you've got? Try that and just see how well they do. It might surprise you. It might disappoint you. But what it is going to do for you is give you a piece of knowledge in your own spaces that you're going to be able to utilize year after year after year. You're going to have some experience that says to yourself, this is not the best place to plant carrots. I tried it once. It didn't work because it was too shady. Or you're going to say to yourself, it was enough early on for my peas to get rolling and they appreciated the shade later on. So whatever your situation is, you're super smart in being aware of what that plant is asking for you to give. Now your job is to do the best you can to provide that. And sometimes you just try, you do the best you can. And if it's not enough, then you just make adjustments and know that maybe in your garden, this is not the crop to plant. But in your garden, maybe peas and cucumbers that can take a little more shade, and some other plants, greens, all those lettuces and spinaches and beet greens, maybe they could do well for you in your semi-shady garden. You're going to have access to crops that maybe somebody who has nothing but hot, full sun has. So we're not going to call it sad or bad or negative. We're just going to call it what you've got, and we're going to learn to use what you have to the best of your ability for the crops that thrive in what you've got. So this is your year to learn a lot about it, I bet.
Yeah, totally. My computer was getting hot in the sun, but yeah, and my other question is, do you treat peas and beans the same way?
Good question. Thank you for that. Okay, so a bean and a pea are legumes, and a bean and a pea do the same sort of thing, fix nitrogen from the air and apply it to the soil. Now, that little process takes them a little while to accomplish, right? I mean, you can imagine that's a big job. Holy moly, to be able to do something like that blows my mind. But it's not immediate. It's not that that pea is going to emerge and immediately begin to do that. It's going to have to grow its little leaves, photosynthesize, and do a couple other things in order to be able to start that process. A bean is the same way. So we're going to need to make sure that we put a little nitrogen in our soil while they grow to get to the point where they can fix even more. But beans, unlike peas, need a little bit more warm conditions to grow. They need the soil to be warmer before they sprout, and they need those days to be warmer and longer before they really start to grow. So do me a favor, start your peas now directly in the soil and hold off a while on your beans until the soil temperatures warm up. Okay? And importantly, your peas are going to be able to weather, as are your root crops. They're going to be able to live through and survive some of these cold nights that are still coming, some of these temperatures that maybe today we can't imagine are still in our future. But I guarantee where I live, there's still a lot of frost coming my way and a lot of cold and freezing nights to come. The peas can live through all of that quite happily, as can the root crops. So that's why now is the window of time to plant roots and peas. It's not the window of time yet to plant our bean seeds. So hold off a little while on those before you seed the beans. But same idea as with the peas. Okay?
Yeah, that's great. And the amount of water, the watering can is good. They don't turn our irrigation on until, well, they don't tell us, but until May-ish somewhere.
Until May, exactly. Which, to get things germinating is hard if you don't have running water. I'm like you, I'm in the same boat. I don't have any irrigation and I'm watering with this water can. So I'm going to use my burlap bag to, first I'm going to water that bed, make sure the bed is moist. Then I'm going to water my burlap bag, and then I'm just going to take it off at the last possible moment that I have to, because that's going to make sure that my watering chore until my water comes on is as easy as possible, right? Then once the water comes on, I like to use drip tapes in my row crops, but you can use whatever has worked for you and whatever you have found to be the best choice in your garden scene. So yeah, that burlap bag makes it good, makes it way simple, and really just keeps your success at a high level so that we don't, seek casualties by drought, because it's super hard without running water, without our water systems being turned on yet, to keep our garden beds moist. The good news is, if we can keep that upper level of soil moist during this early growing and germinating time, down below, if you were to go out to your garden beds, really blows my mind. I think to myself, wow, it's dry already, because the top 1 or 2 inches has gotten all that heat from this early sun and has dried out. But if you dig down low, think about where that root is going to be quickly growing down into. That's still moist and cool down there. So I'm not so worried early on that once my roots get down there, they're going to be super dry, because there's moisture down below in that soil. It's just in the early stage that moisture is super critical and really can play a make it or break it kind of deal on our germination. So you should be okay, but the burlap bag, try it. It's going to work. And you know what else works? If you don't have access to a burlap bag today and you want to get things rocking today, I've had friends do the same thing with a board, okay? A plain old board. If you've got something out in your tool shed or in your garage that's just a board that nobody cares it's going to get, wet, and make sure it's not a treated board, because those have a lot of yucky chemicals you don't want in your soil. But a board, just like the burlap placed right over the top of my moistened bed with my germinating carrot seeds and beets and parsnips and radishes. Just lay it right down over those rows. Always look up underneath it. And as soon as I've got germination, I take the board off. But boards can work just as well as a burlap bag. I won't need to water the board because it's going to shade the soil, and it's going to make sure that that moisture that I put in the bed is going to stay there. So a board will work too if you've got one of those. Yeah.
And one other question. I have lost it. Shoot.
It's okay. Tell me what you've got growing in your garden now, or what you've grown in your semi-shady garden that's worked for you. Is this year number 1 for you?
This is year number 2, but we moved in like the end of May, June, so we got a late start, and we got some of your starts for the tomatoes that they did okay, but we realized we weren't watering them enough because it's so dry here.
Yeah, it is.
But I did start the greens last week or yesterday.
Oh, great.
And that was my question. Is the same apply for those seeds as far as drying out if they're just on the top?
If water is an issue, and it sure can. That little trick can apply to anything that you are germinating, anything. Just make sure, and the key is, and I always stress this, is that you check it often so that as soon as you see them beginning to emerge, you remove that, okay? But yeah, you can apply that to anything. And really, it helps a lot during this off season, this shoulder season, when so many of us that grow in an area where we have irrigation, and the irrigation doesn't get turned on till a certain time of the year, that we're struggling to keep our garden beds moist. If this little tip helps, it can work with anything you're starting.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
We tried cucumbers last year, but that didn't work out well at all.
Okay, tell me why. Let's just delve into cucumbers for a second. Why didn't that work out so well, do you think?
I think we didn't water them enough initially.
Okay.
And the soil might not have been good enough.
Yeah. And in addition to water and all of the things that happen in the many things that you and I are going to learn as backyard gardeners over our gardening career. I mean, by the time that I'm using a cane to walk down the rows, I'm going to know a whole lot more than I know now, or than I knew years ago when I started. It really is amazing. And I'm super excited for you and everything that you're going to learn. And one of the ways you're going to learn it, and anybody who wants to become kick ass at growing a garden, one of the ways you're going to learn it is by practicing the very simple technique called observing. Stepping back and watching and observing and asking questions. Why isn't that plant doing well there? Okay, well, I don't know the answer, but what could the answer be? Observe. Is it moist? Is it too shady? Is it in the hot sun? Has something been eating it? Does it have a bug? Being aware and learning how to gather the information by just literally spending time in your garden without thinking about what I should and should not do, and just allowing the information to show itself to you is going to amplify your success a million times over the years. It really does. Learning to watch, learning to quiet yourself, learning to shut off all of this that's up here. Oh, I got to go do this and I got to go do that. So-and-so is going to call, and oh my gosh, I should have done that. That needs to stay outside of the garden rows, okay? It needs to stay outside the fence. And what we got to do is just enter the garden with an open mind, with a clear space, because there is communication going on there. We want to make sure we don't miss it. And one of the ways is just to place ourselves there with a willingness and an openness to receive, to be aware, to take note of things that maybe we didn't notice, and apply that to your gardening career. Apply it to your journal, apply it to what you're thinking about, apply it to your gardening theories, whatever it is. But that little trick, my sweet pea, is going to serve you a million times over the years. And then teach that to your kids, teach it to your friends, teach it to your parents, teach it to everyone you love. Because you know what I think is so amazing about that is that little trick applies to everything in the world. It applies to what ails us in our cultures. It applies to our communication with one another. It applies to, our interactions with people who own businesses. It applies to, our interactions with people we don't know online. It applies to our human condition. And the garden is so beautiful and so capable of helping us become human. You know, the modern world tends to take some of that out of us, and the garden returns it. So I am super excited for you and what's coming for you in your career, in your garden spaces. There's no wrong answers. There's no successes or failures. There's just learning, right? And you're going to gather and you're going to get better. And pretty soon you're going to have more coming out of your garden and you know what to do with. Yay. So there you go.
A random question. Maybe you'll have a class on this, but you mentioned storing carrots all year or all winter.
Yeah.
Here's how that works.
Okay. So there's two ways it could work. One is, and I'm glad you brought this up, carrots. When you harvest a carrot out of the garden row in July or August, you're like, wow, it's my carrot. It's going to be delicious. And you take a bite of that and it's like, yeah, it's okay. The reason it may not be as sweet as you were hoping is carrots are amazing. They've got a lot of starches in their roots, right? Beets are the same thing. But in the fall, when they get hit with a cold snap, when those temperatures start to drop, those starches in the roots turn to sugars. And that's the point at which you and I want to pull those carrots and eat them from the row. We can also amplify that sugar content and really turn them into carrots that anybody's going to come running to you for by leaving them in the ground throughout the winter. If we have a way to do that, and let's talk about that, because even more of those starches turn to sugar. I just was at a friend's house who had done this quite successfully. Her carrots were ginormous. We pulled them from the ground. We took a bite out of them, and I could not believe how sweet those carrots were, because they stayed in cool soil and were allowed to turn sweeter and sweeter over time. Now, there comes, so the old timers where I live, I mean, there was a time when people didn't have grocery stores to go to. There was a time, believe it or not, when people didn't have a refrigerator to put their carrots in to keep them cold. So they did creative things like they had root cellars. Root cellars are, Google it if you don't know what they are. They can be, you know, do it yourself. The old timers used to dig holes in the ground. The native peoples of this area used to dig holes in the ground, bury their crops and cover them over with something to mulch them. That little trick applies if you leave your carrots, or some of your carrots if you want to try it, in the fall. Maybe don't harvest all of your carrots. Maybe leave a row or part of a row for an experiment. Leave them in the ground, cover them with a mulch. What do you got? Grass clippings, leaves, rotting hay, wood chips works good. Something that's not going to be a haven for rodents, because the rodents are also going to be looking for food. Okay, but this works. I've used wood chips because one of the things I find with mice is they're not so inclined to want to bury and live in my wood chip pile. Okay, they just don't like it. They want to do things like, I don't know, they love rotting compost. You know, they'll be happy to live in there. So I don't want to cover my carrots in the fall that I'm going to try to leave in the ground. I want to cover them with something that I'm going to do my best to make sure it's not a rodent haven. And then I'm going to put a board over the top of that. Why? Because I live someplace where 2 or 3 or 4 feet of snow can fall on the top of my garden. And I'm going to want to make sure that I can get to that row of carrots. I'm going to mark it, and I can go out in January, right? There's snow on top of the ground. There's wood chips on top of my carrot row. I've covered it with a board. I can scoop off that snow or cover it with a tarp so that pulling it back makes it easy to access that row that's underneath there. Pull back my board. Chances are that soil is going to be relatively loose. It probably won't be frozen solid because that snow acts as an insulation barrier. And I'm going to be able to lift some of those carrots and bring them into my house. That works just as well as my very full refrigerator that's got all sorts of other food. So if I don't have room in a refrigerator to store carrots, because they're going to need to be refrigerated, they need cool in order not to go soft and sprout. That works if you don't have anything appropriate. If you have a root cellar, a storage facility that is designed to keep a temperature at between like 37 and 42 degrees, that's perfect for storing root crops. And we'll have to do a class on that because there's specifics, ways you need to pack these things to keep them. But if that's not an option, your refrigerator drawers are also a place to store carrots, okay? Just pack them up, put them in the back of the crisper, and take them out as you need them. But that row is going to do keeping them in the ground. Maybe, I've got so many carrots, I just don't have room for them all. Keep them in the ground as long as you can, okay? All the way through the fall. Keep them there and use them out of the ground as long as you can, because that's the best place to store carrots. The earth keeps herself at the appropriate temperature that the carrots want to be kept at in order to stay firm and crisp. I love that. Everything's evolved together. It's a web of life out there. I'm just the girl that's coming in to say thank you. Thanks for the sweet little carrot. But keeping your carrot in the ground and making sure that it gets hit with those frosts in the fall before you harvest it is going to ensure that your carrots are sweet and yummy. And that applies for parsnips and beets. Radishes, definitely not, because those are going to be eaten up long before, harvest season happens at the end. But couple tips there. Way more information we can go to on another class for sure. But yeah, that's how you get sweet carrots.
Well, thank you so much. This was incredibly informative.
Yeah. Right on. Okay, thanks for being here today.
You're welcome.
And good luck. Report back and use the spaces that you've got to grow the food you can, okay? And you're going to learn over the course of time what that is. And your biggest key to success is awareness, becoming that girl, and feeding your soil. Your soil and you need to become the best friends, right? You're going to be able to learn, is your soil good? Is your soil asking for more organic material? Are there worms in that soil? Can I look and see anything happening there? Is there a lot of beautiful organic material in that soil? Does it hold moisture? Does the moisture just, dribble all the way through it and immediately it dries out and turns to dust? Learn from your soil, let it speak to you, and add organic material. There's never too much, right? It eats the soil consumes literally the organic material. In a teaspoon of rich organic soil live literally, if you had a magical microscope and you could see them, billions, B with a B, that's a lot of microbial activity living, doing, dying in my soil. And so my job is to make sure that I provide that what it needs. And what it needs, I don't need to know specifically. Adding organic material to my soil, then those guys can take it from there. I guarantee you, they'll know how to turn that into the appropriate food for both themselves and for the worms and for the growing plant life that's going to follow. So feeding your soil organic material is your job. What they do with that organic material is their job. And that's what makes it so wonderful. I don't need to know everything about everything. I just need to know that I got a job here. And my job is to feed that soil. So that's what I'm going to do. And that's what your job is going to be as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yay. You're welcome. So that's the root crops. That's the pea beds. Anybody else have any questions before we head down the road and call it time to go out to the garden? I really do want to encourage you today that, one of the things that people have said to me is, hard can it be to grow a garden? All you do is you put your plants in the row and you throw water on them and they grow. Well, if you're lucky, that may be true. But there is going to be a lot of things that come up along the way. There's going to be pests. There's going to be disappointments. There's going to be, uncertainties. But one of the things, just like we talked about a second ago, is just your ability as a human being to be open, to have your ideas of what your goals are that you want to accomplish and be open to how you arrive at that harvest season. The disappointments come, but every disappointment is an opportunity to learn. Every disappointment is an opportunity. Still, 25 years later, I go, wow, yep, that's right. Should have known that. Won't make that mistake again. Gonna make a note about that. Because it's never a missed opportunity. It's just an opportunity to learn. So go easy on yourself. If, it all goes to shinola on you, you can always start all over with some of the crops, or you can just chalk it up for experience and make sure you don't make that mistake again. But like I said, they're not mistakes. They're just an opportunity for you to get even better at growing your food. So unless there's any last questions today, I think we're going to wrap this up. We're going to wish you a very happy gardening season. We're going to thank you for being present. Thank you so much for your willingness to learn and to be open to this whole idea of growing food. You and I are at this remarkable point in history, I believe. We've got technology to lean on, and we've got gardens to, to show us how to remain human. So let's do that today. Let's use our garden to grow our food, to learn to love ourselves even more and everyone around us. And, be open to these ideas that come to us as gardeners. I can't tell you how many amazing ideas I've had. They haven't changed the world necessarily, but they've changed me and they've changed my world by just being present in the garden. I think you're going to find that, it's alive. It speaks in ways that maybe you do not yet understand. Maybe you call me a little crazy, but I can tell you, it'll talk to you. Our job is to learn how to listen to it. So that's what we're going to do. Plant your roots, plant your peas, do the best you can. Don't forget, my friend, the burlap bag. We'll have an opportunity for another yard food session coming up real soon. I think the next one we're going to talk about is onions and potatoes. Some really important things, but that window of opportunity is coming at us soon. So I'll look forward to seeing you for the next yard food session. You take care, my friend. I love you tons. Bye-bye.